Tonight on Primetime, Washington says a deal with Iran may be within reach, but fresh military exchanges and competing narratives are putting the fragile ceasefire under growing strain. As diplomacy continues alongside confrontation, one question remains. Are the two sides closer to a deal or a new escalation? Welcome to the program. I'm Andi Mioč. U.S. President Donald Trump said he is in a meeting in the Situation Room to make a, quote, final determination on a potential deal with Iran. He outlined conditions, including Iran permanently giving up nuclear weapons, fully reopening the Strait of Hormuz, removing remaining sea mines, and destroying buried enriched uranium under U.S., Iranian, and IAEA supervision. Trump said no money would change hands and added that other less significant issues had already been agreed. Meanwhile, Reuters reports that Iran's Fars news agency has dismissed Trump's comments on a possible agreement, calling them a mixture of truth and falsehood. Joining us now from Sao Paulo to talk on the news coming out of Washington and Tehran is political analyst Diogo Castro Silva. Diogo, welcome. Thank you so much for coming on the program at such a time, such a flurry of news coming in. As we speak, Trump is in the Situation Room. In that same post where he announced he will be making his final decision, he said the naval blockade will now be lifted. We did not wait long for an Iranian response. The Fars news agency in the last few minutes, they've said what you've just heard, a mixture of truth and falsehood. With all that we're seeing, do you think a deal has been made and greenlit by the Iranians?
Hi there. Well, the situation is, as has been all along this war, pretty confusing. We are now on I don't know, I've lost count of how many announcements that the deal is closed and it has never materialized. I do think President Trump wants an exit to the conflict, but I would not take the announcements yet at face value about a deal. I would say the most we can expect is a deal about discussing a potential deal. This is the situation we have been with the ceasefire. But anything further, I think, is pure speculation at the moment.
Would you say that this has been some sort of a race? We've heard from Iran's top negotiator a bit earlier today saying, quote, that no step will be taken before the other side acts. Do you think maybe this was the act Tehran has been waiting for?
It's still very hard to say because we have to distinguish here, I think, two aspects. The first is that President Trump wants to leave the conflict, wants to exit the conflict with an appearance of victory. Now, Iran also wants an appearance of victory, and in the case of Iran, is much closer to reality than in the case of the US. So there is a tension on the rhetoric and substance. I do think the US, the maximum they can realistically achieve is something close to the JCPOA, but now with an extra leverage that Iran has discovered, they are not one nuclear weapons, they are two. One linked to uranium and the other linked to the world economy via the Strait of Hormuz. So Iran legitimately thinks he is in a stronger position. And this is the crux of the matter. Anything close to a deal that Iran accepts will look in the eyes of many in the US close to President Trump as a capitulation. So every time he advances in saying he's going to sign a deal as well, besides the rhetoric that does not correspond to reality many times, he's attacked on his flank by saying he's doing worse than what Obama did back in 2014. So we have this dance, which is very hard to understand in reality where this is heading, in terms of having a concrete peace deal and an opening of the Strait of Hormuz. This is one aspect. The other aspect is there are many people interested, even if there is a deal, there are many people interested in sabotaging the deal. There are different factions in Iran that want to explore this increasing leverage. But there are also other parties on the side of the US that are very unhappy with any potential deal, like Israel. So all of this makes any concrete assessment of the situation extremely difficult to do.
And Diogo, obviously there are a lot of moving parts here. Different things are being outlined by the two warring parties. But how much of all of this is actually just optics?
Oh, a lot. There is a big aspect of performance here, especially we have to see all these announcements. One day there is a ceasefire, the other day there is not a ceasefire, then they are attacks, then they are not attacks, then the deal is closed, then it is 95% done, which looks like I'm also 95% on the verge of acquiring Nvidia. I just need the money, the last 5%, which is all of this situation. There is a big element of performance, the press conferences, the speeches of the Secretary of Defense, the memes of Iran. So all of this is playing in reality, where there is a kind now of a frozen war, but also in the political and performative side of politics, if you want.
And Diogo, you've described it very aptly, like the second nuclear weapon that Tehran might have, the Strait of Hormuz. Now, the waterway being open for business is a piece of news that traders and investors across the world are hoping for and waiting for. Now, with such a major impact on the world's economy, on all the prices, starting from gas to a chain reaction to the flour, to the bread, and everything else, has Iran perhaps, by using this instrument, created a dangerous precedent?
Oh, definitely, because Hormuz is not alone in being one of these critical waterways. The first aspect we have to see about the Strait of Hormuz is that the big difference of before the war and now after the war is that the sanctions regime in Iran is over. Because it's very hard to see that Iran will accept ships of nations that have sanctions, existing sanctions against Iran to cross the strait. So this means actually that the sanction regime is over. Now, there are other waterways, critical choke points in the maritime system where this can play out. We have the Suez Canal, of course, where we have the Houthis threat. We have the Malacca Strait. We have the Panama Canal. So we have several waterways critical to world trade that can be subject to different kind of political interventions, and one has to see, and people have to see, is not it's not necessarily that you have to shoot down ships. What you have to disrupt is the insurance market, and for that to disrupt the insurance market, you don't need the actual violence, you need the threat of violence to make the insurance market having a lot of difficulties to insure the ships, and thus make it very hard for those ships to cross these critical waterways, starting with the Hormuz Strait. So there is a dimension, and there is also, I must say, an irony in destiny where this is going, because in the beginning of the U.S. as a global power, and this goes back to the 19th century, the US started to intervene in freedom of navigation. First, and the first episode of those interventions was against what was called at that time the Barbary States, which is today present Morocco and Algeria. This was the first foreign intervention of the US, and it was about the freedom of navigation. If you want to go back to today, so go back in the to the present, the challenge of the US as a global power is happening exactly on the theme of freedom of navigation, represented by the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. So we kind of do a full circle here of more than 100 years.
And of course, the nuclear issue is there from day one. Trump was saying that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. Iran was saying all along that it does not want one. Now, according to Trump, the nuclear material that's buried under the rubble following last year's U.S. strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities will be jointly unearthed and destroyed. Would that be a good first step, perhaps, to resolve their nuclear differences?
In principle, yes, but I find it very hard to see how Iran will accept those conditions. I think they will accept a kind of similar system to the GCPOA, because don't forget the following: for the mullah regime, because today we have a different regime in Iran, in my opinion. So the mullah regime, led by Khamenei, now dead, and even Khamenei had a fatwa against nuclear weapons. So the mullahs were always against the pursuit of the nuclear weapon, and like I said, even Khamenei had a fatwa on the issue against the use of and possession of nuclear weapons. That provided an internal break in the regime that no longer exists, because what today we have is an RGC regime under the cover of the mullahs. And the lesson I think a lot of people take in Iran is that there was a big mistake in Iran being a threshold state, meaning having a nuclear program, a military nuclear program, but not actually having the nuclear weapon. And they have just to point to North Korea and ask themselves why North Korea has never been to have the same questions themselves. So I do think what we have now is a regime much more keen to pursue nuclear weapons. And given where the negotiating leverage is right now, I find it very hard that Iran ultimately will accept those kind of conditions, very strong conditions on their nuclear program that go well beyond the GCPOA. Because don't forget, the GCPOA at that time, the enrichment of uranium in Iran was much less advanced than today. And there would have been no war between US and Iran. So really, I would take with a pinch of salt those declarations or those statements that US will personally supervise the destruction of enriched uranium in Iranian territory.
And Diogo, we are very short on time, but I would like to hear your thoughts on what kind of a reaction do you expect from Tel Aviv to all of this. Do you think that Trump coordinated with Netanyahu on this?
No, I don't think. I think this is strategically for Israel. This is any kind of agreement between the US and Iran that maintains the regime and maintains a latent capacity, because knowledge cannot be uninvented, is a profound strategically defeat for Israel. And so I do think Israel will try, and for Netanyahu personally, that for years has been pushing US to intervene against Iran. So, and is in the middle of a campaign for prime minister. So I do expect Israel will try to sabotage any deal with these characteristics, at least not overtly, but through other means.
Diogo, thank you very much for joining us on Primetime and sharing your insight and analysis.
You're welcome.
All right, after a short break, a Russian drone crashes into a residential building in Romania, injuring civilians and triggering a diplomatic response from Bucharest and NATO allies. Don't go away. Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. Romania says there was no safe way to intercept a Russian drone before it crashed into an apartment building in the city of Galați. The incident injured 2 people and triggered strong reactions from NATO allies and European leaders.
2 people were injured after a drone struck a 10-story apartment building in the Romanian city of Galați during an overnight Russian attack on neighboring Ukraine. Romanian authorities say the drone crossed into the country's airspace shortly before 2 a.m. on Friday morning. Military officials say it traveled around 10 kilometers inside Romania before disappearing from radar and crashing into a residential area.
All available data has already been analyzed to establish the exact sequence of events, and it resulted in the fact that there were no real opportunities to engage it safely. I want to convey very clearly that the situation is under control. We are not facing an attack on Romania. We are facing the effects of a conflict taking place right next to our border.
The Romanian government strongly condemned the incident and summoned Russia's ambassador to the foreign ministry. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte said the alliance remains ready to defend every inch of Allied territory. European leaders, including Kaja Kallas and Antonio Costa, also condemned the drone strike as a violation of Romanian and European airspace. Residents in Galați say concern is growing as attacks near the border continue.
Well, I think it's another provocation by the Russians. I don't believe this was an accident. This has happened too many times for the Russians to be doing this by accident. Either that or they're highly incompetent at waging war. But NATO needs to do something about this.
I am thinking Russian peace is slowly reaching here in Romania. I am Ukrainian, and what happened here? In Ukraine, there are hundreds like these all night, killing people, children, the elderly. Just one fell here, and Romanians and the European Union must conclude to draw attention so that the Russians understand he can't do such a thing.
This is the first time since the start of the war in Ukraine that a drone has hit a densely populated area in Romania and caused injuries. Romania shares a 650-kilometer border with Ukraine and says Russian drones have entered its airspace dozens of times during attacks near the Danube River.
Well, what began as another overnight Russian attack on Ukraine has now spilled directly into NATO and EU territory. Joining us now to take a closer look at the implications is Klaus Jurgens, political analyst with Economy First, coming to us from London. Klaus, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us on the program. How significant would you say this incident is, given that there were civilian injuries inside a NATO member state?
Well, thanks for having me. Of course, happy Republic Day. Pleasure, honor. Now, I am a little bit playing devil's advocate today. Now, in your previous commentary, esteemed commentary, it was mentioned that it is not necessarily Russia attacking Romania, but it might be, now reading between the lines, a result of a conflict across the Romanian border, talking about the Ukrainian-Russian conflict. And I am, let's say, 99% certain this time, and we journalists should always say factual or fictional, but I would be surprised if Vladimir Putin now decides to attack Europe or NATO member states by means of a couple of drones and eventually triggering Article 5, which means that once one NATO member state is attacked, automatically all the others will come to its rescue. Now, Romania, of course, is a totally different case. The European Union would have, only today I did a very interesting, I hope so interesting piece about what happens if an EU member state outside of NATO would be attacked by someone else, and what kind of military response could that trigger. And I said a little bit cynical, there could be not any military response because the common and foreign security policy is basically existing but non-existent. So coming back to your question, it is unfortunately a very sad incident, but some say already it was a false flag operation. I'm not going that far, but I am not expecting Russia to engage in a full-fledged drone or any other war towards its Western neighbors. No, I don't.
Klaus, whatever may be the case of the origin of the drone, the fact is that it did crash, and now Romanian officials are saying that there was no safe opportunity to prevent it from crashing and injuring people. Do you think that kind of an explanation might satisfy not only the Romanian public but also NATO allies?
Well, it's a good point. If there's no satisfactory response system, then the European and NATO response system doesn't work anymore. So they should perhaps look elsewhere. And I know this was not your question, and please cut me off if you want to, but we have to remember 21 dead school children, mostly girls and some boys, by a recent attack carried out by Ukraine. Now, I do not think that this was a revenge attack, no. And don't get me wrong, Russia would not deliberately target civilians only to revenge an attack on civilians. They read the newspapers, they read social media, they are on social media, no. I do not buy into this, yes, civilian casualties, but my dear friend, what would you say? Could it have been a false flag operation? We had so many in the past. How come that after the school children were killed by Ukrainian attacks, how come so quickly afterwards a drone supposedly lands in a building in European Union territory? Could that, it sounds so easy, it sounds so obvious, and let me make it clear, every innocent life lost is one life too many. But I'm not necessarily buying into the Western propaganda that now Russia is attacking Romania and then all of the rest and everyone should stay home. No.
Well, in any case, the European Union has described the incident as a strike and a serious violation of European airspace. Several leaders are calling for a stronger response. Could this incident change Europe's approach to the war in the East in any significant way, do you think?
Very good question, my dear friend, colleague, if I may say so. No. the Western nations already, and I'm following the news here day in and day out, and regardless of Bayram, which my family is celebrating, of course. But even today it was said, look, we have to invest more into Ukraine defense. We have to spend more money making Ukraine a safer place to be. And we heard that so-called President Zelensky said associate membership within the EU is not what he wants, because the Germans said, Chancellor Merz, no associate membership, but no full membership in the next couple of days or weeks or years. And now can you imagine what happened after the Maidan uprisings, which, don't get me wrong, I'm very outspoken about this. You can cancel or quote. They were not coming from Ukraine within, but they were orchestrated from abroad, in particular from the United States and Madam Newland and others. So what do we have now? They wanted to have a Ukraine independent from Russia. They wanted to have a Ukraine looking west only. And now if people would go onto the street, every day I'm watching the news when young men are supposedly trying to be snatched by Zelensky's hitmen and put onto the front lines. Now, what kind of democracy would this be? 7 years without any elections. So, as I've said, very outspoken here. I think we all have to be careful defending Ukraine 24/7. We have to be careful what the Ukrainian people actually want. And Ukrainian people, I believe, want democracy. They don't want to be member of NATO, of the EU, of anything. They just want to be Ukraine. And as I've said, cut a long story short, I'm not entirely sure this Romanian drone attack is exactly what it looks like.
Well, on the other side, Moscow, of course, increasingly argues that the European Union cannot be part of any future peace negotiations because it is, quote, already a party to the conflict. Do you think this latest incident could affect that argument in any way?
It would only strengthen that argument, to be honest. Now, Brussels, indeed, and Washington, they're both part of the conflict. And if you want to have peace in the region, including Ukraine, at some stage, someone really has to tell President Zelensky that, look, there will be a territorial agreement or there will be no agreement. And if we listen to what people in the Crimea, if we listen to what people in southern Ukraine actually say, are we happy by being run by the Ukrainians, or do we not have our own roots, which are much more Russian than Ukrainian? We have to take this into account. First point, if I still have half a minute. No, the EU is one-sided on what they perceive as is the legitimate Ukrainian government, and they do not care what the legitimate Ukrainian voters might have to say should there be an election. My wish would be presidential and parliamentary elections, and the picture will change.
Well, we will see about that. But back to this latest incident. Of course, this is not the first airspace violation. When we look back, there were even Article 4s being triggered following drones and fighter jets, for example, in Estonian airspace. How can these incidents, when they keep happening, how can they influence NATO's and EU's security posture towards Russia?
Very good. Now we come to Article 5. Thanks for mentioning this. Yes, one more time. Now, is a drone from outside of NATO airspace already triggering Article 5? I would not say so. Is a violation of airspace triggering Article 5? I would not necessarily say so. What would happen if a NATO drone accidentally or planned enters Russian airspace, it would probably be shut down. But there would be no human casualty. It's a drone. It's out of metal and steel. You know, I am fully aware of the risk. But let me, if I may, go back a couple of years. I once penned an article and say, would Russia ever invade Goatland? Which they did. There was a Finnish-Russian war, Swedish war, decades ago, hundreds of years ago. Now, and I said, no, of course not. People misunderstand that Vladimir Putin might perhaps be the enemy of choice recently for the West. But definitely his administration are a clever bunch of people. Now, they would not want to risk a NATO Article 5 response, because then they would not only have Estonia here and Finland and Sweden there and what have you, they would have all of the big players, all of the sudden actually looking towards Russia and saying, hey, this was one step too much. Would Russia really want to risk a third world war? No, I honestly don't believe in this. So I think it's playing to the gallery, even if it was a real drone, even if all the other drones were real, and even if they were masterminded by Moscow, yes. I think it's playing to the gallery of the voters back home in Moscow to say, hey, look, we can actually invade our so-called enemy's territory. But even the voters in Russia would say, and what? What next? Are you sending the tanks or the boys with the boots on the ground? No. So I hope nothing serious will come out of this. And my biggest wish is still that Europeans wake up and say, look, what is going on in Ukraine? Of course, Russia started it, but the response by Ukraine is by no means any better. And look at how the young men are drafted into the military. Look at corruption. Look at money carried from Austria in vaulted trucks. Supposedly, no one knows where the money comes from. So I think peace is the only way forward. The EU must step up the peace process, must step up the negotiations with Washington, and literally tell Ukraine as well, look, enough is enough. And then it has to tell Mr. Vladimir Putin, enough is enough. The bloodshed, apologies, is unbelievable. It must end.
Indeed, it does. Klaus, thank you so much for joining us on Primetime and sharing your insight and views.
Absolutely.
After a short break, Israeli strikes across Lebanon leave dozens dead and injured as the conflict continues to intensify despite growing international concern. Don't go away. Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. Israeli strikes killed at least 28 people and injured 42 others across Lebanon on Thursday, according to Lebanese officials. The attacks targeted residential neighborhoods, commercial areas, and main roads in several districts across the country. Meanwhile, the IDF claimed it had conducted a precise strike in Beirut, but did not offer further details. The UN condemned civilian deaths.
Of humanitarian affairs in Ukraine.
While the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah is continuing to escalate, with some of the deadliest strikes in recent weeks reported across Lebanon. Joining us now from Lisbon to talk on the latest is Basel Dweik, Middle East researcher at the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data nonprofit. Basel, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, there are direct talks going on between Israel and Lebanon, but what does Tel Aviv's willingness to absorb and withstand so much international criticism but continue with strikes tell us about this stage in the conflict?
Well, I'm glad to be here again. as you rightly said, negotiations are going on between the Lebanese and the military delegations at the Pentagon today, actually, and it's an episode of a series of negotiations, of broader political negotiations between the Lebanese government and the Israeli government. The idea here actually is the Israelis are trying in one way or another to persuade the Lebanese government on clamping down on Hezbollah. Now, this is a big problem for the Lebanese government because on that side, it cannot actually give the order for the LAF or the Lebanese armed forces or the official Lebanese army to go and fight Hezbollah. Because we all know that Hezbollah are also Lebanese citizens. They're mostly from the Shiite sect. And any clash between the LAF and Hezbollah risks civil unrest and even a civil war in the country. Regarding your question about how much the Israelis can actually absorb international criticism, I think they can absorb a lot as long as the United States backs them. We've seen that there is a lot of support coming from the US, a lot of support from the Trump administration for Israel to continue its attacks against Lebanon, to continue its attacks against Hezbollah, to create this multi-layered security buffer zone in southern Lebanon. So what's the threshold when it comes to that, when it comes to international criticism? I don't know. I think the Israelis have a lot to maneuver, honestly. In Lebanon, the death toll is around 3,000 people killed, and I think around 10,000 more injured. However, the death toll in Gaza reached 70,000 people, and until that death toll was absorbed, we haven't seen ceasefires happening there. And even the term ceasefire, honestly, has changed dramatically in the region. We've seen a lot of people, dozens of people actually being killed in Lebanon. This so-called ceasefire that started on April 16. Even I can give you some numbers here. I like presenting data because I think data actually explains the context better.
Please do.
So between 23rd and 26th of May, we've absorbed or we've recorded at Akhled around 242 air and drone strikes. Israeli air and drone strikes in Lebanon. And this, just to give you an example, this is around 110% increase to the previous 4 days recorded of events recorded in Lebanon. So we are definitely seeing an escalation amidst U.S.-Iranian negotiations of a broader upcoming security framework in the region.
And with all that data, since the truce and even since the beginning of this latest conflict after Hezbollah attacked in support of Israel, who is dictating the pace of events on the ground as things stand? Is it Hezbollah? Is it Israel?
That's actually a really interesting question. I will tell you something. Before the ceasefire took place, we've seen an all-out war between Hezbollah and Israel. Hezbollah was attacking Tel Aviv. It was attacking major northern cities in Israel, like Haifa. And in response, Israel was attacking the southern suburbs of Beirut. They were attacking the Bekaa Valley. They were attacking southern Lebanon. And after the ceasefire, we've actually saw a lower intensity in conflict and reduced scope. So Hezbollah was only, or mostly, I would say, attacking Israeli troops stationed in southern Lebanon and some positions at the very northern end of Israel. And Israel limited its strikes to south of the Litani region. However, with what we've seen, with what we are seeing now is that the Israeli military itself is dictating what's going to happen on the ground. It's dictating it in Lebanon because it believes that the Lebanon front is much different than the Iranian front. It wants to, as we've said numerous times before, it wants to decouple these two conflicts so that it can deal with Lebanon alone. So if the Israeli military strike Beirut, if they strike the southern suburbs of Beirut, like we've seen yesterday, Hezbollah will increase its attacks against Israeli soldiers in southern Lebanon. However, what is actually interesting about this is that Hezbollah used to attack Tel Aviv and used to attack cities, major cities in Israel, when Israel attacks the southern suburbs of Beirut. But we've seen that they are only limiting their attacks against Israeli soldiers in southern Lebanon currently, despite a precision strike that you mentioned in your report that targeted the Shweifet area, which is within the Beirut southern suburbs. So I think there is limited military capabilities when it comes to Hezbollah because they are really getting pounded hard by the IDF.
And how vulnerable is Lebanon becoming as a country? We see the obvious limits in capacity and what Beirut can do to keep up with this conflict.
The problem is that the Lebanese government does not have the economic leverage, neither does it have the military leverage in order to force Hezbollah or to force Israel into any concessions. And this is what the main issue of the Lebanese government is. It's broke. The LAF is not capable of being a true army or military. It's more of a security force to balance the sectarian power and sectarian influence in the country. And also, there's not a lot of room to maneuver when it comes to Beirut. What Beirut currently relies on, or what the Lebanese government, which is represented by three main people, let's say, the parliament speaker, Nabih Berri, which is a close ally to Hezbollah, actually, and the new prime minister, Nawaf Salah, and the Lebanese president, Joseph Aoun, which was the former army chief. They are trying to call their international partners, call the regional partners to stop the bloodshed in Lebanon. But as we've said before, who's dictating that on the ground is the Israeli military and Hezbollah's response on the ground. So really there is not much room to maneuver when it comes to the Lebanese government.
And obviously we have the U.S. facilitating these talks between Israel and Lebanon. Just how much can outside actors, not only Washington, France, and Gulf states, even perhaps play, how much of a role can they play in shaping what comes next?
I think when it comes to outside influence or international and regional influence in Lebanon, it's really important to look at that influence because Lebanon is a small country. Its GDP per capita is low. It doesn't produce much. It's not a very important country when it comes to the economical geography of the region. But I would say something that Gulf influence in Lebanon is a positive influence. Saudi Arabia's influence is a positive influence, as well as France's influence. However, the major influence when it comes to outsider influence in Lebanon is the United States of America, because frankly, the U.S. is the one that supports the Lebanese army. It is the one that supports the ISF, which is the Internal Security Force. It is the one that pays the wages in coordination with Qatar. That since we've seen since the 2019 financial crisis in Lebanon, even the LAF soldiers didn't have money to move around to do anything. It was only $60 a month, I remember. So if you have the economic leverage, then you have, I would say, a lot of influence when it comes to the political spectrum in Lebanon.
Very interesting. Bassel, thank you so much for joining us on Primetime and sharing your insight.
Thank you.
All right, after a short break, Cuba is warning of a growing risk of confrontation with the United States as relations between Havana and Washington remain under strain. Don't go away. Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. Cuba's deputy foreign minister has warned that the risk of U.S. military aggression against the island is increasing as diplomatic talks between the two countries remain stalled. Speaking in Havana, she accused Washington of using false pretexts to portray Cuba as a threat to U.S. national security and justify that pressure. She said the lack of progress in talks raises doubts about Washington's approach, while stressing Cuba still supports dialogue but rejects interference. The remarks come amid U.S. sanctions, which Cuba says have worsened fuel shortages and deepened its economic crisis. Well, to take a closer look at the state of relations between Washington and Havana, we're joined now by John Kavulik, president of the U.S.-Cuba Trade and Economic Council and senior editor at Issue Insight, joining us from Istanbul. Welcome, John. Always a pleasure to have you on the show. Why would you say Cuba is raising the alarm about a possible U.S. aggression now?
They haven't been raising the issue recently. They've been raising it for basically 67 years, since the Cuban Revolution, January 1, 1959. But the second Trump administration has ratcheted up the opportunities that they see to bring about meaningful commercial, economic, financial, political, societal change in Cuba. And because President Trump was able to abduct Nicolas Maduro, the president of Venezuela, in January, that, to use political pool terms, it was a bank shock that hit Cuba because Venezuela was providing a tremendous amount of oil, all kinds of fuels, and also money to Cuba. And that was cut off immediately. And there was no other country or group of countries to come in to replace it. And that, thus, we've seen for 5 months a continuing rolling down the hill of Cuba's ability to survive.
Well, John, as you've pointed out, Cuba has for decades occupied a unique place in American strategic thinking. How relevant is the island today in Washington's security calculations?
You know, Cuba's always been a domestic political issue rather than a foreign policy issue. And that's primarily because almost 2 million people of Cuban descent live in the state of Florida, 93 miles north of Havana. So it's always had an outsized role in U.S. domestic politics. And then you add to the mere fact of roughly 20% of Cuba's population in South Florida, you had Fidel Castro. And Fidel Castro was Cuba. Cuba was Fidel Castro, the leader of the revolution, he's the guy that kicked America out of Cuba. And then he connected himself with what was the USSR. So communism, USSR, we went with the Cuban Missile Crisis, just all of that fed into Cuba having a far outsized role in U.S. political discourse than it should have in terms of being a country of 10 million people. And Fidel Castro dies in December 2016 as President Trump is ready to assume his first term. Raul Castro, who took over from his brother, retires. New guy, Miguel Diaz-Canel, takes over, who's sort of an apparatchik, just sort of manager. And then it just continues to unravel because the first term Trump administration, second term Trump administration, they have in the administration people of Cuban descent who now are sort of like political crack addicts. They've been given all of the crack they want, meaning the ability to influence Cuba, and they're using it. They used it the first 4 years. They're using it now a year plus in. And so Cuba, with this outsized presence in the U.S. domestic political process, President Trump is now able to basically pile on with all the tools of the U.S. government and make life for Cuba very difficult and make some people in South Florida very happy.
And speaking of those tools, we just recently saw an indictment of another former Cuban leader, Raul Castro, the brother of Fidel Castro. With Iran obviously now taking the spotlight and thinking in Washington. Do you see preparation for what might come next when it comes to Cuba? Where should we look for the next signs of any possible escalation, and how could that escalation even look like?
Yeah, the Pentagon has been detailing potentialities for military engagement at Cuba for 67 years. So it's no surprise that the Pentagon continues to do it. They've done a lot more of it during the past 5 months, much more planning. But people are supporters of wanting to do something in Cuba use that as see, President Trump's going to invade, President Trump's going to do all this stuff. He's got the military planning. But for the Pentagon, that's their job. And when the president asks the Pentagon, do you have a plan for this country? Do you have a plan for that country? They need to have it, and they need to have it at the ready. They can't tell the president, we'll get back to you in a couple of weeks, Mr. President. So they do this with almost all 193 members of the United Nations. There's some sort of plan militarily that might be needed at some point. So they're ready to do that. I do not believe that we're going to use the military to go in and grab a 95-year-old man, meaning Raul Castro, and try to bring him to Miami. The indictment was performative. It was optics. It played very well, but it's so unlikely we're going to try to do to Raul Castro what they did to Nicolas Maduro. Nicolas Maduro was a sitting head of state. He ran officially, ran Venezuela. Also, Venezuela has something. So when you grab someone, you've got oil, you've got minerals, you've got some value there. With Cuba, it's sort of like a political Chapter 11. All you get is debt. So whoever controls Cuba, you control a lot of debt. You don't control a lot of assets that you can immediately grab onto. Now, as far as the date or what to watch for, June 5th is the day to watch. On June the 5th, the executive order that President Trump signed now 3 weeks ago takes effect. And that executive order basically said any company anywhere in the world that has connectivity with Gaesa. Gaesa is a Cuban military conglomerate. It has tentacles everywhere in Cuba, from retail to wholesale to hotels to aviation to port operations, rental cars, gas stations. And this executive order said that we're now listing Gaesa as a specially designated national. That means SDN, you're on the block list, meaning you can't, as a U.S. national, you can't have any relationship with that company unless you have a license to do so. But it also means any company anywhere in the world. So what's happening is just the presence of that executive order during the last 3 weeks. We've had a company in Canada, Sherritt, a big mining company, pull out of Cuba. We had the two of the three largest shipping companies in the world, and these two, Hapag-Lloyd of Germany, CMA CGM of France, which combined are about 60% of moving all the cargo to and from Cuba, they suspended operations. And now we're seeing Spanish companies, and that's going to be the big one. Melia we're watching for, which is the largest manager of hotels in Cuba, along with the list is about 22, 23, and there are banks in Spain, there are hotel companies in Spain, and they're likely to be pulling out. And so June the 5th is the day to watch for, because at that point, if all these companies run away, Cuba's just going to have to negotiate with the Trump administration.
Well, the pressure certainly is mounting. John, thank you so much for joining us on Primetime and sharing your insight.
My pleasure.
All right, after a short break, Russia and its Eurasian allies are increasing pressure on Armenia over its European ambitions, calling for a referendum on the country's geopolitical future. Stay with us. Welcome back. You are watching Primetime. For months now, questions have been growing about whether Armenia can continue balancing between deeper ties with Europe and its membership in the Eurasian Economic Union. Now, ahead of Armenia's parliamentary elections, Russia and several Eurasian partners have publicly signaled that Yerevan may soon have to choose. A new statement from the leaders of Russia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan called for a referendum on Armenia's future direction, arguing that closer integration with the European Union just may be incompatible with the benefits Armenia currently receives within the Eurasian bloc. Now, joining me in the studio to take a closer look at all of this is A News' Deputy Editor-in-Chief and my dear colleague, Orhan Amashov. Orhan, welcome. Thank you so much for sitting down with me. Now, can you tell us a bit about why does Russia want Armenia to vote now, and what is this referendum even about?
Thank you, and it was always a great pleasure to converse with you regarding matters of regional and global significance. 29th of May is actually the day on which, allow me to remember, I think about 12 years ago, back in 2014, Eurasian Economic Union actually was established as an organization, and Armenia joined it in January 2015. And now, just 8 days before the crucial, pivotal parliamentary elections in Armenia, a number of Eurasian countries, including Russia, leading country, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Belarus, collectively called on Armenia to make a decision. Argument there is incredibly basic. You can't be a member of one customs regime and simultaneously have close integration with another customs regime. That's a no-brainer, basic, but Armenia has been pursuing this line for some considerable time. And Russia is now saying that, well, you have to make a choice. You have to make a decision. What Russia is basically saying, you're a member of the Eurasian Economic Union. You are entitled to preferential treatment inside the Eurasian Economic Union. And there are certain aspects of bilateral Armenia-Russia arrangement. For example, that particular one of those arrangements means that Armenia is receiving a Russian natural gas, at a discounted price of $177 per 1,000 cubic meters, and the market price for that is actually $650 per 1,000 cubic meters. So basically, Russia is saying you are benefiting from being a member of the Eurasian Economic Union. Your economy is largely connected with Eurasian economic space, with Russia still remaining Armenia's largest trading partner. Simultaneously, you're pursuing EU policy, EU integration. First of all, it's incompatible. And Armenia is saying, well, I'm pursuing that economic integration with European Union, but I want to remain member of Eurasian Economic Union. When the right time comes, we'll make a decision. Russia is saying that you can't talk in this particular fashion. It's too sensitive. You have to make a decision now. That's the whole crux of the matter, and it is undoubtedly, indubitably connected with the pre-election pressure on Armenia emanating from Russia.
And just how much pressure can Russia exert on Yerevan? We've seen they banned the sale of certain Armenian waters in Russia, but how far can Moscow go and stop Armenia from moving closer to Europe?
Not before the elections. I mean, I don't think that Russian pressure on Armenia and now collective Eurasian economic pressure on Armenia before the 7th of June's parliamentary election could actually produce any discernible impact. This is an asymmetric struggle against Armenia, with the purpose of defining election outcomes in Armenia on the 7th of June. But it could impact the outcome in the following way. Pashinyan may fail to attain constitutional majority. And the failure to attain full, unquestionable constitutional majority will have a bearing upon whether Armenia will be able to hold referendum. Because that referendum, for that, Pashinyan needs strong majority in the parliament. So, although it is very clear Pashinyan is likely to win the elections by means of actually depriving him of that majority, full majority, Russia may impact the outcome of the referendum. And of course, by extension, the outcome of the Armenian-Azerbaijani peace process, because we know that last hurdle is Armenian constitution. That means referendum. If referendum does not happen, there will be no peace deal. So Russia may attain its objective there. But let me just look at this subject, Andy, with your permission, in a very sort of compartmentalized fashion. The reason why Armenia is facing this dilemma, the reason why Armenia is so embedded in Russia-dominated Eurasian Economic Union is down to its nature of its relationship with Azerbaijan. Back in 2013, Armenia was on the verge of signing association agreement, which included also deep and comprehensive free trade arrangement. That arrangement was not concluded back then because under the massive pressure coming from the Kremlin, from Vladimir Putin, Armenian President Mr. Sarkisyan ended up saying that on the 3rd of September 2013 that Armenia would pursue Eurasian integration model. And after that, in January 2015, they joined Eurasian Economic Union, and that effectively means that it's not just a free trade then, but also it's a customs regime. When you are part of a customs regime, together with other members, you are subscribed to what is called common external tariff. So all the goods entering Armenia are subject to particular import duties, and Armenia is not deciding on that unilaterally. It's a Eurasian economic matter. Effectively, this means that you cannot have deeper integration with the European Union. What Armenia is presently doing, they signed back in 2017 Comprehensive Enhanced Partnership Arrangement, which allows Armenia and European Union to cooperate in terms of political alignment, regulatory approximation, but not something that would lead to actual situation wherein Armenia will be able to join the European Union. And what Russia and Russian allies are doing, basically Russia itself is doing, I think it's a Russian-led effort. I don't think Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan massively invested in this idea. I think it's a Russian-led process. They're saying that, well, you've got all of these benefits, but if you join the European Union, if you continue that intensive integration project, then you will lose all of these preferential treatment elements that you're enjoying now. So your economy is deeply embedded in the Eurasian economic space. 82% of natural gas coming to Armenia, it actually comes from Russia. Basically, they're saying that there will be inflation, there will be economic paralysis. Whilst trying to pursue European Union integration, you will lose so many things. This is a pressure on Armenia. It's a real pressure. Russia is capable of carrying out those threats, but I think it will not have massive bearing on the election outcome on the 7th of June.
And Orhan, how long do you think Armenia can play this game, sitting on 2 chairs? Obviously, there was this call to a referendum from the Eurasian partners, but just how long can Yerevan keep up the game?
It's perfectly possible Armenia will be able to carry out this policy for some considerable time. What Armenia needs to be able to do that, what Armenia is trying to do is perfectly sensible and legitimate. Armenian government, Prime Minister Pashinyan, has never said that we need to move away from Russia. He's talking about diversifying away from Russia. What Prime Minister Pashinyan is saying, Russia is our partner, Eurasian Economic Union is the valuable customs regime, but we don't want to lose the benefits, but we also want to have relations with other actors. We don't want to be too reliant on Russia. And Russia fully understands that when Armenia is trying to diversify away, one day it will be too independent and Russia will lose its leverage. Russia does not want to lose that leverage. And in this particular context, if Azerbaijani-Armenian peace process continues in full swing, that limited economic interaction becomes proper economic interaction. Once we have proper connectivity between Azerbaijan and Armenia, once we have the House of Caucasus, once we have Turkish-Armenian normalization with Armenia properly integrated into the European markets via Turkey, then Pashinyan will be in a better position. For now, it's very risky. I think he has been trying to play a very carefully crafted game. He has been so far very successful. I'm not saying he is sort of outmaneuvering Russians at this juncture, but thanks to the Azerbaijan-Armenian peace process, thanks to the outcomes emanating from there, thanks to the prospect of Turkish-Armenian normalization, his chances are there.
Very interesting stuff, Orhan. Thank you so much for joining me.
Pleasure.
Always an invaluable insight. Okay, after a short break, we'll check in with our correspondents all around the globe. Don't go away. Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. The EU's foreign affairs chief says Russia is on the back foot in its war with Ukraine. The comments came as EU foreign ministers gathered for informal talks in Cyprus. News's William Denslow filed this report.
This gathering was held under the gymnic format, meaning that essentially no concrete decisions would be made. But we've heard from Kaja Kallas, the EU's top diplomat and foreign affairs chief. She said that it was good to hear the views of both Prince Faisal of Saudi Arabia as well as India's foreign minister Jai Shankar. She said that it was an opportunity for all sides to discuss the current security theatre in the Middle East. And when it came to issues in the region, as she said, they discussed ways to increase joint action as well as to step up security alongside Europe's partners in that part of the world. She also said that there was an increased need to diversify things like trade and shippings to be less reliant on potential choke points like we've seen in the Strait of Hormuz, this critical shipping route that has been largely blockaded since the conflict began. Kaja Kallas said that it is a grey zone. She said that it's not in a state of war, neither is it in a state of peace. Turning to the situation in Ukraine, well, Kaja Kallas said that Russia is on the back foot, both militarily, economically and politically. She also ruled out that Europe could play a mediating role in the conflict with Ukraine, saying that essentially Europe stands firmly with Kiev and cannot be a neutral party going forward. She also said, very much reiterating Europe's position, that she does not want to see Russian forces in places like Georgia and Moldova going forward. On the situation elsewhere in the Middle East, and when it comes to Israel, she mentioned the possibility, and this was discussed amongst foreign ministers, the possibility of sanctions on West Bank settlers, as well as potentially some Israeli politicians. She said, though, that this would be a conversation that would be continued the next time European foreign ministers gather. William Denslow, Frey News, Brussels.
A new transit shipment of Russian wheat and fertilizer is passing through Azerbaijan to Armenia, in another instance of the regional rail route being used. A News' Gulchin Hojalieva reports.
Wagons loaded with Russian wheat and fertilizer are being sent from Bilajari railway station in Baku for transit through Azerbaijan en route to Armenia, continuing an established flow of regional cargo passing through the country's rail network. The shipment includes 4 wagons of wheat totaling 280 tons and 4 wagons of fertilizer weighing 277 tons. The cargo is moving from Bilajari toward the Böyük-Kesik border station, which serves as a key transit point on the route. This latest consignment adds to significant volumes already transported through Azerbaijan in recent months. So far, more than 28,000 tons of grain, over 4,000 tons of fertilizer, as well as shipments of aluminum and buckwheat have moved from Russia to Armenia via Azerbaijani territory, highlighting the steady use of the corridor for freight movement. Alongside transit operations, Azerbaijan is also facilitating energy exports to Armenia, including diesel and different grades of gasoline, reflecting a broader pattern of expanding logistical and trade links in the region. Gülçin Hocalayeva, Nijat Kasımov, A News.
The British government is expanding support for young people struggling to find work after a former minister warned too many risk being locked out of jobs and training opportunities. Our correspondent Zeynep Farajzadeh has the details.
The British government has announced plans to create 300,000 new work experience and training placements for young people amid growing concern over rising youth unemployment across the country. The scheme is part of a wider £2.5 billion youth employment support package aimed at helping young people find jobs, training and long-term career opportunities. The placements will focus on sectors facing labour shortages, including construction, healthcare, social care and hospitality. The announcement comes just a day after a government-commissioned review warned Britain risks creating what it described as a lost generation unless urgent action is taken. The report, led by former Labour Minister Alan Milburn, found that the number of 16 to 24-year-olds not in employment, education or training has now risen to more than 1 million, the highest level since 2013. According to the review, around 1 in 8 young people in Britain are currently classed as economically inactive, with that figure projected to rise to 1 in 6 within the next 5 years if no action is taken. The report also highlighted a sharp decline in entry-level jobs and work experience opportunities, making it increasingly difficult for young people to enter the labour market. Ministers say the expanded Youth Guarantee Scheme will ensure young people claiming benefits for 6 months are offered paid work, training or work experience opportunities. The government says the new placements are backed by some of Britain's largest employers and are intended to help young people build what it calls lasting careers. Jennifer Zade, A-News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas said that any peace negotiations between Russia and Ukraine should also address the presence of Russian troops in Georgia and Moldova. That statement drew strong reactions from both Tbilisi and Moscow. Nini Nikolaishvili has more.
Kaja Kallas made the remarks ahead of an informal meeting of EU foreign ministers, arguing that if any Russia-Ukraine agreement includes limits on Ukrainian armed forces, then similar conditions should apply to Russia, including the withdrawal of its troops from Georgia and Moldova, where they have been present since the 1990s conflicts and the 2008 war, respectively. In Georgia's case, the issue is far from theoretical. Russia controls around 20% of Georgian territory, the breakaway regions of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, recognized internationally as part of Georgia. The EU has consistently supported Georgia's territorial integrity and has been one of the strongest voices calling on Russia to reverse the consequences of the 2008 war. That context helps explain the reactions that followed. Prime Minister Irakli Kabakhidze did not welcome the comments, telling journalists that European institutions have for years acted against Georgian national interests rather than defending them. He said words must be matched by action, adding that so far the EU has stood on the wrong side. From Moscow, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov responded more bluntly, telling Russian media he does not comment on what he called idiotic statements. Two governments with very different relationships to Brussels rejected the same remarks on the same day. The comments come at a sensitive moment. Since the disputed October 2024 parliamentary elections, Georgia's EU accession process has been effectively suspended. The European Parliament has questioned the credibility of the results, while months of street protests followed the vote. The government has also introduced legislation that Western partners and civil society groups have compared to Russian-style laws restricting independent media and NGOs. The EU says these concerns are benchmarks Georgia itself agreed to meet on its path to membership, not interference, but Tbilisi rejects that framing, accusing Brussels of political pressure and interference in domestic sovereignty. Georgia still formally maintains EU membership as a strategic goal, but the gap between that ambition and current political reality appears to be widening. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A-News.
Uzbekistan has signed investment and export agreements worth more than $3.5 billion with Chinese companies aimed at supporting major infrastructure and development projects across the capital. A-News' Sevil Rajapova reports from Tashkent.
Tashkent has secured more than $3.5 billion in investment and export agreements during the Uzbek-Chinese Inter-Regional Forum in Xi'an. According to the city administration, the deals cover transport, urban infrastructure, construction and industrial projects. The largest allocations include $1 billion for road infrastructure, new bus rapid transit lanes and overpasses, a further $1 billion for transport and social infrastructure, and $500 million for residential developments in renovation areas. Other projects include $400 million for drainage, irrigation and rainwater management systems, $150 million each for decorative stone and ceramic production, $100 million for the development of branded 24-hour streets, and $50 million for smart waste sorting equipment. The Yangiavlot industrial zone will also see $130 million in cooperation agreement. Export deals were also signed covering Uzbek jewelry products worth $150 million, along with cotton yarn and silver concentrate. Officials say the project will be financed by the Chinese side without the use of state budget funds or government guarantees, supporting the long-term development of the capital. It is Sevil Rajapova reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A-News.
Kazakhstan says it still sees no alternative to the Caspian Pipeline Consortium for exporting the bulk of its oil, despite ongoing efforts to diversify supply routes. Officials say additional corridors are under consideration, but none are currently capable of handling comparable volumes. Fariza Kalimurzina has the details.
Kazakhstan says it sees no alternative to the Caspian Pipeline Consortium for exporting most of its oil. The statement came from Energy Minister Ilana Khenzenov amid ongoing discussions over diversifying export routes for Kazakh crude on global markets. According to the minister, despite the efforts to explore new export options, replacing the CPC pipeline in near term is not realistic. More than 80% of Kazakhstan's oil exports move through the route, carrying tens of millions of tons of crude each year, and officials say no existing infrastructure can match its capacity. Authorities in Astana stress the focus is not on replacing the CPC, but on expanding export options. Kazakhstan is already using several alternative routes, including the Kazakhstan-China pipeline, the Aktau-Makachkala corridor, and shipments across the Caspian Sea. And among the options under consideration is the Baku-Supsa pipeline linking Azerbaijan's Sangachal terminal near Baku to Georgia's Black Sea port of Supsa. The route has an annual capacity of up to 7 million tons of oil. However, its use has remained limited since 2022 amid disruptions to Black Sea shipping following the war in Ukraine. The minister also noted that no official talks have yet taken place with Azerbaijan. However, if the route proves economically viable, Kazakhstan says it's prepared to consider it as an additional export option. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
The Collective Security Treaty Organization says the situation in Central Asia remains tense, despite some recent positive developments. Speaking at a security forum in Moscow, the organization's Secretary General said tensions between Afghanistan and Pakistan are also affecting stability across the wider region. A News' Tamim Bahis has more on that in Kabul.
CSTO Secretary General Talatbek Masadikov says the region continues to face serious security challenges, including concerns over terrorism and drug trafficking. He said those issues remain a major threat, particularly for countries bordering Afghanistan. Masadikov also pointed to Afghanistan-Tajikistan border, saying a targeted interstate program approved by the CSTO in 2024 could help strengthen security there. According to him, improving border security could also help ease wider tensions across Central Asia. His remarks come as regional countries continue to monitor developments in Afghanistan, particularly along its borders with Pakistan and Tajikistan. Meanwhile, Russia has also expressed readiness to help ease tensions between Afghanistan and Pakistan. Alexander Venediktov, Deputy Secretary of Russia's Security Council, made the comments during a meeting with the Deputy National Security Advisor to Pakistan's Prime Minister. Venediktov said Moscow hoped both Afghanistan and Pakistan would return to dialogue and resolve their differences through political and diplomatic channels. He added that Russia was prepared to provide comprehensive support to this process if needed. For now, regional powers appear to be urging a dialogue, while warning that unresolved security issues could continue to affect stability across Central and South Asia. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
China has reaffirmed its support for Pakistan's role as a mediator in ongoing U.S.-Iran negotiations as the two countries' foreign ministers held talks in New York on the sidelines of a UN Security Council meeting. For more on that, we go to Beijing and A News' Mahnur Makhdoom.
Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi met Pakistani Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Mohammad Ishaq Dar in New York on Thursday, exchanging views on the situation in Iran and bilateral relations. Wang Yi said that Pakistan has actively played a role in facilitating US-Iran negotiations and described Islamabad as a trustworthy and capable mediator. He added that China will continue to support Pakistan's peace efforts, push for dialogue and negotiations, and promote a comprehensive ceasefire to restore peace and stability in the Middle East and the Gulf region. Dar thanked China for its backing and said that Pakistan and China have jointly put forward a 5-point proposal on peace and stability in the Middle East and the Gulf region, which has received broad international support. He also added that Pakistan will continue to play a constructive role in de-escalating the situation. On bilateral relations, Wang Yi noted that Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif's recent visit to China was a success and said that Beijing is ready to work with Islamabad to deepen political mutual trust, expand practical cooperation, and advance the China-Pakistan economic corridor. Dar reaffirmed Pakistan's commitment to implementing the consensus reached during the visit and to supporting China-proposed multilateral initiatives. The meeting came as Dar wrapped up a 3-day visit to New York after attending a high-level United Nations Security Council meeting. Manu Makhtoom, A News, Beijing.
U.S. President Donald Trump has increased the refugee admissions ceiling by 10,000 for this year to allow more white South Africans to come into the country. Official figures show that by the end of April this year, about 6,000 white South Africans had already entered the U.S. as refugees. A News' correspondent from Dar es Salaam reports.
President Donald Trump says the increase in the refugee cap is due to what he calls an unforeseen emergency refugee situation. The U.S. administration claims rising racially motivated incidents in South Africa justify expanding the refugee program, which is expected to mainly benefit Afrikaners. However, South Africa's Department of International Relations and Cooperation has rejected claims that white South Africans are being persecuted, calling the allegations unfounded. Last year, Washington announced plans to admit up to 7,500 refugees, most of them Afrikaners, before September 2026. With the latest increase, the total number could now rise to 17,500. U.S. officials estimate the expansion will cost taxpayers an additional $100 million to support refugee resettlement programs. Traditionally, refugee quotas in the United States have focused on people displaced by war, conflict, or humanitarian crises across different parts of the world. Analysts warn the latest move could further strain already tense relations between Pretoria and Washington. Isaac Lukando for A News in Dar es Salaam.
All right, after a short break, we'll take a look at more top stories of the day. Don't go away. Welcome back to Primetime. Ukraine has announced a major deal to strengthen its air force, saying it will buy 20 new Gripen fighter jets from Sweden and receive a donation of 16 older models next year. Speaking in Uppsala alongside the Swedish Prime Minister, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said Kyiv plans to acquire up to 150 jets under a wider deal.
These jets with very specific weapon, and we are very thankful that we will get jets with weapon, not just jets. These jets, Gripens, with specific weapons, especially meteors, missiles, and etc., which can destroy 200 kilometers plus. So we think that we will push out these jets, Russian jets, and they will not be able to use massively aerial bombs.
Iran's World Cup squad will be based in Mexico during the tournament this summer, traveling into the United States for match days, after Mexican officials said FIFA sought an alternative arrangement for the team.
Iran's ambassador to Mexico, Abolfazl Pasandideh, visited Tijuana on Thursday and thanked President Claudia Sheinbaum for accepting a proposal to host the Iranian delegation after he said the United States had failed to fulfill its responsibility to receive the team. Sheinbaum said Iran's national football team would stay in Mexico and travel to the United States on the days of its 3 World Cup matches after Washington declined to host the squad for the tournament. She said FIFA approached her government after US authorities said they did not want Iran staying in the country throughout the June 11th to July 19th competition, despite Iran being scheduled to play 3 Group G matches there.
In these circumstances, where northern neighbours had the duty to receive us but failed to do so, we come to Tijuana, and this is so valuable to us.
Iran's Football Federation said the team's base would move from Arizona to the Mexican border city of Tijuana, with Iran due to face New Zealand and Belgium in Los Angeles before playing Egypt in Seattle. FIFA confirmed the move on Monday.
Former U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi has appeared before a House committee investigating the handling of records linked to convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. After her dismissal, Pam Bondi appeared before Congress as lawmakers examined her handling of the Epstein files. Investigators say the inquiry is focused on accountability, with Chairman James Comer saying the committee is working to establish the facts and deliver justice for survivors. The World Health Organization says ongoing conflict, funding pressures, and international travel restrictions are complicating efforts to contain a fast-growing Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Speaking exclusively to A News, Dr. Patrick Otim, Program Area Manager for Emergency Response at the WHO Regional Office for Africa, said the outbreak was spreading rapidly, but health authorities were intensifying efforts to contain it.
Outbreak is evolving because it is expanding. 13 days ago, we had only 3 health zones. Now we have 13 health zones, so that it has expanded, but also that we are scaling up the response actions on the ground to try to contain it. The overall global reduction in funding has impacted across the board. So in terms of from the government side, the support they were getting, and also what we call operational partners. There were different operational partners, community-based organizations, NGOs, and international organizations that were getting funding, and all these have been impacted. Now, from WHO perspective, yes, we have been impacted in different ways. Of course, in the routine programming, HIV, TB, and others. But in the emergency space, we have tried to make sure that this does not significantly impact our ability to be able to respond. The only challenge this time was it was detected a little bit late. It's an area which is insecure, and currently we are trying to ramp up the response and leveraging support. The emergency committee for the international health regulation was convened by the DG, and they have issued what we call temporary recommendations as required under HR. The temporary recommendation is classified into 3. You have the countries where you have outbreak, the countries that are neighboring, and all the other countries. And it has explicitly stated what measures they need to take to get ready and to prevent the spread of the disease. Now, the IHR, when it was put in place, it was exactly for this reason, so that we do not interfere with trade and travel, that we implement evidence-based public health measures that helps countries to build their capacity to detect and respond without putting in place the travel bans, because all these travel bans does complicate the response efforts. This is the 17th outbreak in DRC. This is the 8th outbreak in Uganda. So the 2 countries have experience, extensive knowledge in managing this kind of outbreak, even in the absence of vaccines. The basic fundamentals of controlling this outbreak is known, and they know how to do it. It's only that we need the resources to enable the rapid expansion of the field operations.
New international pressure is mounting on Lafarge, part of the Swiss Holcim Group, over its past operations in Syria. Azerbaijani NGOs and civil society groups have sent letters to governments, embassies, and international watchdogs in 48 countries, calling for independent investigations and stricter oversight of Holcim operations worldwide, including in Azerbaijan.
Azerbaijani NGOs and civil society groups on May 26, 2026, urged local and 48 foreign authorities, including the US, France, Germany, and the UK, to scrutinise Lafarge, part of the Swiss Holcim Group, over its Syrian operations and requested the Organised Crime and Corruption Reporting Project conduct an independent investigation. The letter sent to the embassies call for full transparency, accountability, and strict enforcement of international humanitarian and ethical standards, stressing that commercial interests must never outweigh human rights or humanitarian law. They demand thorough investigation into any potential complicity in crimes and highlight concerns about Lafarge's operations at its Jalabia cement plant between 2012 and 2014. Reports indicate workers faced threats, kidnappings and violence, and court documents and employee testimonies suggest the company provided funding and material support to internationally recognized terrorist groups, including ISIS and the al-Nusra Front, to maintain operations. In October 2022, Lafarge and its Syrian subsidiary pleaded guilty in a US federal court to supporting foreign terrorist organizations, paying $777.78 million in fines and forfeitures. In April 2026, the Paris Criminal Court found Lafarge and 4 former executives guilty of financing terrorist groups between 2013 and 2014, imposing maximum fines and prison sentences. Lafarge remains under investigation for possible complicity in crimes against humanity. The letters reinforce the NGO's demand for independent and transparent investigations into all Holcim operations. They urge governments where Holcim operates to ensure oversight, accountability, and prevention of funding to armed groups. Specific concerns were raised about Holcim Azerbaijan, stressing the company's responsibility as a major industrial actor to uphold the highest standards of transparency, human rights due diligence, and ethical business conduct. The NGOs called for full compliance with international humanitarian and anti-corruption norms.
The ceasefire in Gaza is under renewed strain after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel would expand its control of the territory to 70%. His comments came as airstrikes continue amid stalled negotiations over the next phase of the truce.
Fighting and airstrikes have continued across Gaza despite an existing ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas, as concerns mount over the worsening humanitarian situation in the territory. In Khan Yunis, a warehouse was set on fire following an overnight strike, while in Gaza City, residents surveyed damage from another attack that local health officials said killed several people, including children. The Israeli military said the strike in northern Gaza targeted Hamas militants. Speaking at a conference in the occupied West Bank on Thursday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said he had instructed the military to expand control over Gaza to 70% of the territory.
We are currently squeezing Hamas. We now control 60% of the territory of the Strip. You know this. We were at 50, we moved to 60. My directive is to move to, let's go step by step. First of all, 70. Let's start with that. We're pressing them from all sides. We'll deal with the remnants.
Under the US-brokered ceasefire agreement reached in October, Israeli forces had withdrawn to a demarcation line known as the Yellow Line, leaving Israel in control of roughly 53% of Gaza. Since then, Israeli positions have gradually expanded deeper into the enclave. Despite the ceasefire, Israeli strikes have continued, with Gaza health authorities reporting hundreds of deaths since it took effect. The developments have intensified concerns over deteriorating humanitarian conditions in Gaza, where much of the territory has already been devastated by the war. Israel and Hamas remain deadlocked in indirect talks over the next phase of the ceasefire deal. including the withdrawal of Israeli forces and the disarmament of Hamas.
One more story before we go. Scientists are warning that climate change is making the Hajj pilgrimage increasingly dangerous, with extreme heat now hitting Mecca even outside the summer months. The findings come as pilgrims complete this year's Hajj rituals in Saudi Arabia.
Global heating is making the Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca increasingly dangerous, according to a new scientific analysis. Researchers say climate change caused by fossil fuel emissions has fundamentally altered temperatures in the holy city. Dangerous heat of around 40 degrees Celsius is now regularly recorded in May, when conditions were once much cooler. The warning comes as Muslims around the world celebrate Eid al-Adha and pilgrims complete this year's Hajj in Saudi Arabia. The pilgrimage involves millions of people walking long distances outdoors over 5 days. More than 1,300 pilgrims died during last year's Hajj, when temperatures and humidity reached extreme levels in June. Scientists from the World Weather Attribution Group say May temperatures in Mecca are now on average 3.5 degrees Celsius hotter than before human-caused climate change. They warn that without a rapid move away from fossil fuels, Hajj could face dangerous heat conditions for most of the year by the end of the century. Saudi authorities have expanded heat protection measures, including shaded walkways, cooling stations, misting systems, and medical services. But researchers say those steps alone will not be enough if global temperatures continue to rise.
Well, that's our show. Thank you so much for watching, and join us again on Monday. Until then, from all of us here at A News, have a nice evening and a very nice weekend.